The history of the Hellenistic period. This is a fan-made project that aims to explain and communicate the history of the Hellenistic period in a simple and entertaining way. It is going to be a narration of the historic events, the culture and the society of the era. The term Hellenistic was first coined by the Prussian historian Johann Gustav Droysen to express a historic period that saw the rise of a universal and cosmopolitan civilization based on the spread of classical Greek culture. It is a historic period that roughly spans 3 centuries from the death of Alexander the Great to the time of the Romans. Roughly the first 50 years of the Hellenistic era are known as the Diadochi Wars. The Diadochi were the generals and friends of Alexander the Great that after his death fought each other for the control of the empire. The next 250 years are known as the Age of the Successors. They were the next generation of Hellenistic rulers that controlled the empire of Alexander, which was now divided into the Hellenistic kingdoms. The Hellenistic world reached the highest peak of its development in terms of power and growth somewhere between 250 to 150 BCE. Roughly around 150 BCE, the downfall of the Hellenistic kingdoms started. The downfall reached its climax around 30 BCE with the death of Cleopatra VII and the total domination of Rome. But before we start our journey through the historic events of the Hellenistic era, we must first understand its roots. We must understand how it all started and what led to the creation of the Hellenistic world. In the heart of the Hellenistic world were the Macedonian people. They were the driving force of those 3 centuries. But who were those people? Ancient Macedon was a Hellenic kingdom located at the north edge of Greece. It was a land surrounded by great mountain ranges to the west and to the north. The 2 great rivers of Haliakmon and Axios ran through the heart of the country. The south is dominated by Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. To the east, Pangeo Mountain, the mythic land of Dionysus and Orpheus, together with the Strymon River, create the eastern natural border of the land. The countryside was full of forests and hills, rich flatland and natural ports. This was the land of the ancient Macedonians. Their origin, just as the origin of all the other people of Greece, is lost in myth. According to Herodotus, the tribe of people living in the mountain range of Pindus that spread towards the south came to be known as Dorians, while the ones that moved to the east as Macedonians. The royal family of ancient Macedon claimed descent from Hercules himself through the 3 Heraclid brothers, the Timonids of Argos, who moved to the land of Macedon and settled around Edessa, founding Aegae, the ancient capital of Macedonia, and thus starting the kingdom of Macedon. For many centuries, Macedon was in the shadow of the Greek city-states of the south. The Macedonian society was very old-fashioned and behind compared to the rest of the Greek city-states. The ideals of the Homeric world that had long died out in the city-states of the south were still the driving force of the Macedonian way of life and the structure of the society. The people spoke a rustic dialect of Doric Greek that to the Greeks of the south sounded uncivilized and peasant-like. Just like in the Homeric world, the heroic qualities dominated everyday life. The Macedonian costumes and traditions looked so old-fashioned and primitive to the democratic Greeks of the south. If you hadn't killed an enemy in a fight, you were meant to always wear a distinctive belt. That is to say that you are not allowed to boast about yourself if you haven't shown your bravery and abilities yet. If you haven't killed a wild boar during a hunt, you were not allowed to be inclined during a symposium or a feast, but you have to sit. The organization and hierarchy of the Macedonian society was likewise very primitive and traditional compared to the governing systems and societies of the city-states. In the Greek world, the only states that the role of the king was kept active was in Sparta, in the kingdom of Epirus, and in Macedon. In Sparta and in Epirus, the role of the king was secondary, while in Macedon the king was the head of his people, the organizer of things. Again, the role of the king was a reminiscence of heroic times. He was seen as the father of his people, and the usual names of the Macedonian kings are a proof of that. There were no classes, so to speak, and the population was rather divided geographically in the Upper and Lower Macedonia. All the Macedonians were free men, members of big families with many branches each, that were one way or another connected to the royal family. Its family controlled large parts of land from the Macedonian region. The upper class wasn't aristocracy, but rather big landowner, with the king himself being the biggest of them all. Because there were not any social classes, there weren't any struggles and friction that led to the creation of the advanced governing systems of the city-states of the Greek South. And so, Macedon remained stuck in its own traditional ways. The economy was based on agriculture. The people followed the traditions of the ancient Greek worship, with the worship of Dionysus and Orpheus being the most famous together with Zeus and Hercules. The laws were of traditional customary nature. Apart from the numerous seaside colonies and trading outposts from the Greek city-states of the south, there weren't any cities in Macedon with institutions and organization, but rather farming settlements and settlements around sacred places. The families would fight each other over land or cattle. The land was very often ravaged by raids of neighboring barbarians. There was no army. When there was a case of emergency, everyone who was capable had to fight for the king. Those warriors had the right to vote in the Warriors' Council, a council among equals. In the later years, this came to be known as the Council of the Army. It was a primitive and archaic form of early democracy, a militaristic democracy, one could say. The kingship belonged to the royal family of Macedon, yes, but the succession to the throne wasn't stable. The king had to be elected from the Council of the Army. In many cases of the Macedonian history, if the heir was considered weak or not capable for being the king, the council would choose someone else from the royal family to become the king. The warriors that were close to the king, his inner circle of friends, were known as the companions, another title that reminds us of Homeric times. This was the order of things in Macedon, but it was about to change. Around 500 BC, the Ionian Greeks of Asia Minor revolted against the Persian Empire with the help of Athens and Eretria. In return, the Persians subjugated the Greek cities of Asia Minor and invaded Greece twice. In 492 BC, the Persian general Mardonius invaded Macedon. He burned the land to the ground and made Macedon a client state of the Persian Empire. The Macedonians now had to fight for the Persian king against their own Greek brothers. The king of Macedon, Alexander I, did everything he could to help the Greeks struggle against the Persians, and thus he earned the name Philellin, the friend of Greeks. After the Persian threat was gone from Greece, he took part in the Olympic Games, honoring his Greek identity. The so long remote Macedonia was now recognized as a Greek state by the city-states of the south. This is how a stronger cultural and political connection started between the Kingdom of Macedon and the city-states. A strong influence was coming from the city-states of Chalkidiki and the neighboring areas. Another factor was that the chaotic political life of the city-states of classical Greece made a lot of political fugitives to end up in the court of the Macedonian kings. During the dark times of the Peloponnesian War, the king of Macedon was Archelaus. One can say that in a way Archelaus was the archetype of king that Philip II and the Hellenistic kings later on were. He made great improvements to his kingdom. As Thucydides says, Archelaus did more for Macedon than the 8 kings before him combined. He moved the capital and his court from Aegae to Pella. He built roads and the first fortifications of the country. He organized the Macedonians into an army of Greek standards. But most importantly, he was a man of culture. He wanted to educate his rough people and bring Macedon out of the shadows. In Dion, the secret city of Macedon, where the tomb of Orpheus was, he organized athletic and artistic games in honor of the Olympic Zeus. His court was full of famous intellectuals and artists of the time, like Euripides the tragic poet or Xerxes the famous painter. Plato himself, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, was a personal friend of Archelaus.